Containment nightmare. More questions tonight about the ability to contain Ebola in the U.S. Not so fast. Turkey isn't so sure about allowing coalition planes to be based on its soil. Halfway point. Midterm document from the Synod on the Family opens even more debate. And no cakewalk. A Milwaukee Museum needs some touching up in some hard-to-reach places. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, October 13th, 2014. Good evening on this Columbus Day holiday. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. For the first time, the deadly Ebola virus has spread within the United States. Now health officials are scrambling to figure out how that happened. Jason Calvi joins us tonight with the story.
Brian, the victim is a nurse who treated Thomas Eric Duncan. He's the man infected in Africa and then died last week in Dallas. Now we know the name of this nurse, 26-year-old Nina Pham.
I feel awful that a healthcare worker became infected in the care of an Ebola patient.
The Centers for Disease Control says the healthcare worker is in stable condition. They don't know how the virus was spread, but are investigating and making changes.
We have to rethink the way we address Ebola infection control because even a single infection is unacceptable.
The CDC is watching medical personnel as they put on and take off their gloves and gowns.
We're particularly concerned with that third process, taking off the isolation personal protective equipment, because if it is contaminated, there's the possibility that a worker will contaminate themselves and become infected in that process.
But the CDC director acknowledges it's a difficult task and says he won't be surprised if other healthcare workers catch the virus. Most Ebola cases are in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. Passengers leaving those countries have to answer a medical questionnaire and have their temperature taken before boarding a plane. The U.S. is also screening travelers from those places at 5 airports, like here at JFK in New York City.
The expanded screening measures provide this layer of protection to the already established protocols.
U.S. Customs and Border Protection will also ramp up these screenings in Chicago, Atlanta, Washington, and Newark this Thursday. 94% of travelers from the afflicted area fly into these 5 American airports. But medical officials say it won't provide an absolute solution.
No matter how many of these procedures are put into place, we can't get the risk to zero.
The director of the CDC says the only way to get the U.S. risk to zero is to stop the outbreak in Africa, and trials begin today on the second experimental possible Ebola vaccine. It was made in Canada, and that country's health minister says it's been found to be 100% effective in preventing Ebola in animals. Brian?
All right, thank you, Jason Calvi. Very difficult situation. ISIS fighters are on the verge of taking 2 key locations in Syria and Iraq, with local forces almost powerless to prevent the onslaught. The Syrian Kurdish town of Kobani near the Turkish border is under threat, as well as Iraq's Anbar province west of Baghdad. Local leaders there are pleading for U.S. ground troops to help stop the assault as it nears the Iraqi capital. But both Iraqi officials and the U.S. government have agreed that U.S. forces will not be deployed on the ground. On Sunday, Anbar's police chief was killed in a roadside bombing. ISIS is advancing in Syria as well. The United Nations envoy has voiced fears of a massacre in Kobani. There are mixed signals from Turkey about exactly how it will help the coalition fight ISIS. The government-run news agency says American and Turkish officials reached a deal to train and equip fighters. A U.S. defense official said on Sunday a deal was struck with the Turks to launch airstrikes against ISIS from a base in Turkey. But that country's foreign minister said today there's no deal yet. Turkey has been reluctant to commit to the fight against the Islamic State, and that's caused friction with the U.S. and its allies. Meanwhile, the parents of an American aid worker ISIS has threatened with beheading, says they've told their son's captors they are unable to meet their demands. 26-year-old Abdul Rahman Kasig was captured in Syria last October. Today, his mother, Paula Kasig, told NBC News she and her husband were sent an audio message of their son saying his time was running out. The family says they're doing all they can to free their son, but the demands of ISIS are beyond their power. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Alaska begins accepting marriage applications from same-sex couples after a federal judge strikes down that state's ban on gay marriage. Sunday's ruling in Alaska came in a lawsuit brought by 5 gay couples who had asked the state to overturn a constitutional amendment approved by voters in 1998. The amendment defined marriage as being between one man and one woman, the first of its kind in the nation. Last week, the Supreme Court declined to hear appeals from several states seeking to retain their bans on so-called same-sex marriage. This effectively opens the door to gay couples getting legally married in about 30 states. Lawyers for alleged clergy sex abuse victims in Minnesota say a settlement reached today will result in more than a dozen child protection protocols. The plaintiff in the case claims he was abused by Thomas Adamson, who was then a priest, when the victim was an altar boy. The complaint also alleges the church was negligent in allowing Adamson continued access to children, knowing of his inappropriate behavior. Adamson said earlier this year that he molested around 12 teens between the 1960s and the 1980s. He was removed from active ministry in 1985 and was defrocked in 2009. He has never been criminally charged. Catholic bishops meeting in Rome are emphasizing mercy in dealing with some of the top challenges facing families today. The worldwide meeting, known as a Synod, just released a summary of the first of 2 weeks of talks. Wyatt Goolsby is here now with details.
Well, Brian, no final decisions have been made, and this 12-page document is still very much a work in progress. But the report does give us an overview of the topics bishops have been talking about since the Synod began last week. In a nutshell, it says there are opportunities where the church can do more to shepherd her flock. Today marks the midway point through the 2-week meeting that has largely been closed door. But according to the newly released summary, the bishops are discussing how the church addresses key issues like divorce, cohabitation outside of marriage, and homosexuality. In every case, bishops say respect for the individual is the starting point.
Homosexuals have gifts and qualities to offer the Christian community. Are we capable of welcoming these people, guaranteeing to them a fraternal space in our communities? Often, they wish to encounter a church that offers them a welcoming home.
And that applies to Catholics who may be divorced and remarried outside the church. The bishops say, quote, each damaged family, first of all, should be listened to with respect and love, becoming companions on the journey as Christ did with the disciples of the road to Emmaus. Bishops say the church should encourage pastors to meet Catholics where they already are and help lead them back to the church. It's not a change in doctrine as much as it is a change in tone. Bishop Peter Erdo of Hungary also affirmed Catholic teaching on artificial birth control.
In this light, we should go back to the message of the encyclical Humanae Vitae of Paul VI, which underlines the need to respect the dignity of the person in the moral evaluation of the methods of birth control.
Much of what the bishops discussed is also found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. For example, it says people with homosexual tendencies should be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity, but homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. And so, Brian, that's why it's important to note that in today's document, the bishops rejected recognizing gay marriage.
All right, thank you, Wyatt. As we continue our coverage of the Synod, Bishop Peter Kang, the president of the Korean Bishops' Conference, is joining us from Rome. Your Excellency, we appreciate you taking time to be with us, and we're midway through this Synod on the family with a report out, an interim report. What would you say is the most important takeaway from this document?
Well, the most important thing is that the bishops are very conscious and realize that there are many people who are living in the status not approved by the canon law, and many bishops wish that the church would not condemn those who live out of this canonical state, but many bishops truly wish that the church would manifest the attitude of compassion and mercy, not condemnation to those who are living out of the canonical state.
Well, this seems to be a real time of change in the pastoral approach of our church to these individuals. The format for this week, how will that differ from the week that just passed in addressing these issues that you brought up?
Well, actually, this synod is an extraordinary synod summoned by the Pope to prepare the next regular synod, which will be held next year, next October. So we do not know, even after this synod meeting, what will happen. We have completely 1 year to prepare the next regular synod. So things will develop, and we are not quite sure what will happen even after this synod. Anyway, this is the most important thing for this synod is to listen to many ideas, many voices from different corners of the world. So I think Pope will listen to all these different voices from different continents and different countries.
Having sat in on these meetings, is it your sense that the church's approach to homosexual unions, to divorced, remarried Catholics, is it about to change here?
Well, we are considering, but I can't say anything definitely at this moment. But bishops are really struggling with this kind of issues as well.
So there's a good deal of discussion. Is there any contention among the bishops?
Well, certainly there are different ideas and different opinions, but we are still in a process of dialogue.
Well, Bishop Peter Kang, who is the president of the Korean Bishops' Conference, we appreciate you taking time out from the busy meetings there in Rome to share your thoughts with us on EWTN News Nightly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Veteran Vatican journalist John Allen joining us from Rome. John is associate editor of Crux. That's a website that specializes in coverage of the Catholic Church. John, I know it's been a busy day after a busy week last week there in Rome. This midterm report, which is a work in progress, does it indicate a dramatic shift in the Church's stance on homosexuals?
Well, Brian, the quick answer to that question is no. I mean, the Catholic Church came into the Synod teaching that marriage is between a man and a woman, and it will come out of the Synod teaching that marriage is between a man and a woman. So there is no question of any kind of doctrinal revolution here. I think what the Synod is trying to grope for is how do we relate to people who live in situations that don't correspond with the full Catholic ideal of what married life looks like? That is, not just same-sex relationships, but, you know, people who are cohabitating outside of marriage, people who are divorced and remarried. I think what the Synod wants is that the first thing those people hear from the Church should not be a note of condemnation. It should be a note of friendship. And then, you know, after that, the idea is that you can walk with people and try to gradually lead them towards the fullness of what the Church teaches on marriage. So there is no shift in content, Brian. There clearly is a shift in tone.
But the message that there are positive aspects to these relationships outside of marriage, couples living together, people in civil unions, that's disturbing to a lot of people. It's what do the bishops exactly mean by that positive aspects, do you think?
Well, look, I think you could probably draw a comparison here with those very celebrated comments that Benedict XVI made about condom use back in 2010. I know you remember that, Brian. What the Pope said was that although the Church was not revising its teaching on birth control, that in the context of HIV/AIDS, when there is someone who uses contraception, that is, uses artificial birth control, to try to prevent someone else from being infected, that even though that is not the Church's full ideal of morality, nevertheless, that concern for another person is in itself a positive thing. That is, it's a recognition that morality is not an all-or-nothing proposition. The Church presents an ideal to the world. Lots of people fall short of that ideal, but in the act of falling short of it, it doesn't mean there's no moral value to their lives at all. So, I think what's going on here is the attempt to say that we recognize in all kinds of relationships, that there may be concern for another person, there may be genuine love, there may be self-sacrifice, and in themselves, those are all positive moral qualities. Now, that said, they are still not the fullness of what the church presents to the world as what married life is supposed to be about.
So also on the subject of communion for divorced and remarried Catholics, has the Synod taken any stand on that in this document?
No, I mean, basically this document, which as you say is an interim report from the relator, that is the kind of general reporter, Cardinal Péter Erdő of Budapest in Hungary. I think Cardinal Erdő reported very honestly, Brian, that there is a clear division in the Synod on this question. That is, someone, a Catholic, who is divorced and then gets remarried outside of the church, should they or should they not be allowed to receive the sacraments of communion and penance? Cardinal Erdő said there is clearly one current in the Synod which would say, regretfully, that no, that's not possible because it's about fidelity to our teaching on the indissolubility of marriage, that is, the permanence of marriage. There is another current that would say that in the name of mercy, without questioning the content of the Church's teaching on marriage, that these people ought to be readmitted. It is very clear to me, Brian, that those two camps are very much present in the Synod. We've heard from both of them as the debate has unfolded. I am myself deeply skeptical that consensus on that question is going to be reached by Synod's end. So, you know, I think when the bishops leave Rome and they go back to their diocese, this is clearly one of the things they're going to talk about over the next year. And they will pick it up again when they come back to Rome for the next larger Synod on the Family in October 2015.
All right, we'll catch up with you again, John Allen, with Crux, the website for Catholic news. We appreciate you joining us from Rome, John.
You bet, Brian.
Coming up, these painters deserve hazardous duty pay for touching up a unique Milwaukee museum. On Monday, October 13th, this is EWTN News Nightly. Thanks for being with us. I'm Brian Patrick. The sentencing phase begins today in South Africa in the trial of Olympic track star Oscar Pistorius. The judge is hearing testimony before deciding what punishment Pistorius will receive. He was found guilty of negligent killing but not murder in the shooting death of his girlfriend, Riva Steenkamp. He faces possibly 5 years in prison, or he could end up just paying a fine. Today, the defense team shocked prosecutors with a plea for leniency. One witness recommended Pistorius be sentenced to community service and occasional house arrest. Testimony is likely to last several days. A mob of hundreds who oppose the pro-democracy demonstrations in Hong Kong fought with police today. They're trying to storm the protest zone. Police formed a human chain separating demonstrators from counter-protesters. The crowd demanded that police remove barricades and clear the roads of the pro-democracy group that's been occupying the streets championing free elections in Hong Kong. They say the Occupy Central movement is damaging their livelihoods. The pro-democracy protests have been held continuously in Hong Kong for more than 2 weeks now. Well, it takes a whole lot of courage to do touch-up work on a unique Milwaukee museum. Catherine Zeltner reports tonight.
This is not your ordinary maintenance job. Painting over rust spots on the Burke Brise-Soleil of the Milwaukee Art Museum isn't for the faint of heart.
Walking out on those wings, it'll be intense, but I mean, it's not every day you get to do that.
Not only is the structure 11 stories off the ground at its peak, but it's also uniquely shaped. The wings are counterbalanced by the weight of this bridge. There are no pillars in the building below.
You can't take the wings off of the building in order to get them painted, so they have to do everything up there.
This is only the second time the movable wings have needed touching up since they opened 13 years ago. Internationally known architect Santiago Calatrava factored in the need for maintenance. So there's a secret passageway that leads to the top of the building.
The tunnels and the ladders are a little scary if you're claustrophobic or afraid of heights, but once you're up there, once you're on top of everything, you just forget it, and it's so beautiful up there. But then getting back down is again a little shaky, but once you're done, it's fantastic.
The painters put on harnesses, attaching themselves to a line along the staircase. Museum officials adjust the wings so workers can walk out on them.
Okay. Are you guys all clear for me to raise them?
And then the moment of truth.
Where I was standing, if you look up, you just see wing sections, and down you just see wing sections. You really don't see below you, which kind of made it easier. Not as scary.
But no matter how you look at it, it's no cakewalk getting this iconic structure back to its original condition. Catherine Seltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Up next, clearing up confusion over church teaching on fertility and contraception. It's Columbus Day 2014. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. Thousands came out in New York City today for one of the biggest Columbus Day events in the country. The parade emphasizes Italian culture and achievements. It's a great time for New Yorkers with Italian heritage. The city's Italian-American mayor, Bill de Blasio, often cites his roots. Both candidates for governor, incumbent Andrew Cuomo and his rival Bob Astorino, come from Italian ancestry. Pope Francis celebrated a massive Thanksgiving today for Canada's two newest saints. Saint Francois of Laval and Saint Marie of the Incarnation were canonized in April. The first bishop of Canada and the Ursuline nun were both missionaries, bringing the faith to Canada in its earliest days. Cardinal Gerald Lacroix, an Archbishop of Quebec, celebrated the Mass with the Pope. He said the two saints were models of the first evangelization. Also in Rome, bishops and lay people are discussing the Church's teaching on contraception at the Synod on the Family. Last year's questionnaire sent to parishes worldwide proved that it is an area for many Catholics to be confused. Today's midterm report from the Synod underlined the importance of teaching natural family planning, especially in light of Paul VI's Humanae Vitae, which evaluated the morals of birth control. Dr. Alison Contreras is a practitioner for Caritas FertilityCare, a group teaching couples effective natural family planning. In your opinion, how can the Church better communicate these teachings?
It's important to frame the Church teaching from a positive light. Our rich theology is not just a list of things that we say no to. It's really an invitation to call to us to a much higher plane of holiness, really. And priests can speak about the teaching on contraception from the pulpit. Of course, that's always invited. We would love to see integrated, engaged preparation for couples to be married that includes teaching on church teaching as well as on natural family planning.
Why is this so confusing? What are the key areas of confusion here for Catholics?
So I think first and foremost, it's poor catechesis. We haven't talked about this much, so couples really don't know church teaching. Secondly, when they are familiar with natural family planning, they think, oh, either this isn't effective, they're confused about the effectiveness rates of natural family planning, or on the other hand, they think that it's Catholic birth control. So it's important to know that these are effective methods. The Creighton model fertility care system is 96.8% typical use effectiveness. These are on par with other methods of contraception. So And it's also important to note that what we impart as natural family planning practitioners is education onto the couple for them to use the method as they have seen fit according to the formation of their own consciences.
This is such a personal, though, an intimate topic. How do you approach this sensitively?
It's really important to not be afraid of this. This is our call to holiness, and it's part of the vocation of marriage. People think it's sensitive, but really it's a part of our daily lives, and we have to equip couples with effective tools to be able to have them reach their highest levels of their vocation of marriage.
Didn't this play a very important part in your own faith journey?
It did, actually. I am a convert, and the teaching on natural family planning and against contraception is actually something that really drew me to the church. I learned the scientific facts surrounding natural fertility regulation, and I learned that if the church is right on this, what else are they right on? So.
Well, thanks for sharing it with us. Dr. Alison Contreras with Caritas FertilityCare. We appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us tonight. Until tomorrow, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Thank you for watching. We leave you with some moments from the ordination of Bishop Maurizio Malvestiti at St. Peter's Basilica Saturday. Good night and God bless you.